Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for being here to show honor and respect to Mr. Yosef Forkosh. And also, if you could take a moment to silence or turn off your cell phones at this time. At the beginning of the Torah, we read that God creates human beings by taking dust from the earth and breathing into that dust a nishmat chayim, a living soul. The Torah teaches us that all human beings are composed of a physical body and a living soul. But then at the end of our days, our soul and our body separate once again. Our physical body returns to the dust that it was created from, and our soul returns to God. This morning, our responsibility is twofold. We're ensuring that Yosef Forkosh's body is returned properly to its final resting place. But at the same time, we honor his neshama, we honor his spirit, and ensure that it reaches its appropriate spiritual home. I'll begin with a chapter of Psalms, Psalm 23 in Hebrew and English. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar. A psalm by David, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Binot eshe yarbitzeini, al mei menuchot yinaleini. In lush meadows he lays me down, beside tranquil waters he leads me. Nafshi yishoveh v'yancheni v'maglei tzedek l'man shemo. He restores my soul. He leads me on paths of justice for his name's sake. Gam ki elech b'geitz al mavet lo irara ki ata imadi shivdecha mishantecha hema yinachamuni. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, God, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they offer me comfort. Ta'aroch lefanei shulchan neged tzavarai, dishanta v'shemen koshi, v'shemen roshi kosi rivaya. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. Ach tov v'chesed yirdifuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti beveit Adonai li'orech yamim. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of my days. At this time, I'd like to call up Mr. Forkosh's granddaughter, Michelle, to share some words.
I'd first like Sorry. First and foremost, on behalf of my family, we would like to thank Galia and her husband Vasya for giving our grandpa the utmost care. They cared for him as if he was family and catered to his every need. And because of them, he passed away peacefully and with dignity in his own home. Spasiba, Galia. Vasya. Oh, this is gonna be long. Take as much time as you want. A few years ago, I spoke as the maid of honor at my best friend's wedding. I started by referencing a book summary we had to write in grade school. The book was several hundred pages, and the two of us got a grade deduction for writing summaries that were a few pages too long. I couldn't understand how we were expected to summarize such a long book in just a few short paragraphs. The same applied to our friendship. How could I stand before everyone and talk about my friend of 20 plus years without writing a novel? Today, as I stand here before everyone on a much sadder occasion, I ask myself, how can I speak about a man who lived to the age of 92, but who was also, and most importantly, The greatest man I ever knew. There really aren't and never will be enough words to describe what a wonderful man he was, so I will do my best to honor him today. Our Zaidi was a Holocaust survivor, a devoted husband, a loving father, a proud grandfather, a caring friend, a faithful Jew, and to me, he was my hero. I often found myself referencing him as one because he was the epitome of someone who we should all strive and aspire to be. I admired him for his positivity and ability to move forward in life. His courage and faith allowed him to overcome every obstacle, challenge, and struggle. He endured the horrors of the Holocaust, had major heart surgeries, lost the love of his life of 60 years, and yet he always persevered. As years went by and he got older, a part of me found my grandpa to be more than human, indestructible, if you will. He bounced back from every hospital visit and continued to surpass the age of most. His will to live gave me the hope that he would always be there. But even superheroes don't live forever. His undeniable strength reminds me never to give up, that even in our darkest days, we must find the courage to keep going. Although he is no longer with us, to share his stories and words of wisdom, the memories he left behind will go on forever. I will miss the times we went and got his favorite meal, fried fish and French fries. Zaidi was always dressed to the nines, usually in a full suit, proudly wearing one of his personally handmade hats that he never left the house without. I will miss his thoughtfulness. I once asked him if I could have his Bed Bath & Beyond coupon that came in the mail. Before I knew it, he would call to tell me that he had collected a whole stack of them and that I could come by any time and pick them up. I will miss sharing the Jewish holidays together. Even without Baba Rosa's cooking, Zaidi pulled together all that he could to observe the holiday in the best way possible. I will miss seeing him in his tallis, with his tallis and hearing him recite from his prayer book. I will miss being able to sit and talk with him for hours on end. Up until 7 years ago, really to the day when Baba Rosa passed away, Zaidi was a man of few words. He always let Baba Rosa spend this weekend afternoon catching up with her grandkids while he would doze off across the dining room table. But he had stories he wanted to tell, and I'm so glad he had the opportunity to share them. I will miss kissing his stubbly cheek whenever I left to say goodbye. And all the times I shared with him, I walked away with a priceless memory and a sense of love that will forever be ingrained in my mind and in my heart. His many great qualities and the principles he lived by set an example as to how we can and should live life to the fullest. I am beyond lucky and grateful to have had such a wonderful grandfather who taught me more than any book ever could. He was my hero, my role model, but above all, he was my Zaidi. I miss you and love you.
I'd like to call up Mr. Forkosh's other granddaughters, Jessica and Alexandra, to share some words too.
While we're very sad to be here today, we are honored to be able to commemorate our grandfather who we called Zaidi.
Our Zaidi was a very special man for many reasons. First and foremost, he was the ultimate example of grit and perseverance. Through his life, Zaidi personified hard work and dedication to those around him. As young kids sitting on his lap, we learned that at age 16, he left the family home to learn a trade, hat making, so that he could provide for his family after his own father died. He survived the Holocaust, a feat in and of itself, and worked hard after the war to provide for his new family and rebuild his life essentially from the beginning. We also learned that after the war, he made sure that others less fortunate than him in the community were not without wood during the cold winter months. Hearing those stories as young children inspired a hard work ethic in all three of us.
As his grandchildren, we were able to see a soft, compassionate side to Zaidi that others didn't necessarily see. A stoic man, our Zaidi was not one to show much emotion. But when as little girls, we'd put our cheeks out for a kiss and say I love you, he would never leave us hanging. He babysat us every week as young children. He entertained us at sleepovers at his house with stories of horses and other fairy tales. He even let us jump on his bed, which is a quite generous feat for someone who is obsessively clean. He also made sure to have someone replicate a tray of Purim pastries after our Barbarossa passed away. He then sent them to us while we were away at college so that we wouldn't be without our favorite sweets.
We love our Zaidi so much, and we are really grateful that we were able to have him in our lives for 26 years. We will deeply miss him. We will pass his memory and legacy on by telling his story and making sure that future generations know the kind of man he was.
Mr. Yosef Forkosh was born in the small village of Orenchevo in the Marmarish region of the Carpathian Mountains. The village that Mr. Forkosh grew up in may have only had a few hundred Jewish families, or perhaps even less, but there was an intensity and a purity of the Jewish life there that was palpable. Mr. Forkosh's father, Yitzchak Mordechai, was the only kosher butcher in town. Theirs was a very religious family, and he grew up in a loving home, one of 6 kids with 2 brothers and 3 sisters. Mr. Forkosh's father passed away when he was only 13, and he was eventually sent to Budapest to live with a Jewish family and learn a craft. He studied, of course, to be a hat maker, a profession he would be dedicated to all his life, and one that he was quite skilled at. He always took pride in his hats and would make a point of showing me the fine details within them that others would have easily overlooked. Mr. Forkosh was in Budapest when the Germans invaded. The family he was staying with begged him not to head back home, but Mr. Forkosh refused. If his family was in trouble, then he needed to be there for them. However, soon after he returned, his siblings and his mother were taken to the concentration camps. Mr. Forkosh and his 2 brothers survived the war, but the rest of the family did not. After the war ended, he came home once again, only to find that there was nothing and no one there. Mr. Forkosh eventually found his way to Chust, a larger city not too far from the home he had grown up in. It was in Chust that Mr. Forkosh became a supervisor at a factory that made hats. He would work there for almost 30 years and became widely respected by his fellow workers for his dedication, his humility, and his hard work. It was after the war that Mr. Forkosh met his beloved wife, Regina. Just a week after they first met, they decided to get married. Both were Holocaust survivors. Neither had much in the way of family, but their experiences during the war had taught them just how fleeting life can be. And if they found someone who they loved, even if it was only after a week, they didn't want to waste a precious moment. Though they had only known each other for 7 days, Mr. Forkosh and his wife had 60 years of blessed happiness together in marriage. Mr. Forkosh would often share with me how much he missed his wife since she passed away. The 2 of them were truly partners in the life that they built for themselves, their children, and their grandchildren. Not too long after moving to Chust, the Soviets shut down the borders and the area became part of the Soviet Union. Jewish life became terribly difficult for the next few decades. While there was a small synagogue in the city, it was watched closely by the KGB. Much of Jewish life had to go underground. It was during these years that Mr. Forkosh made profound sacrifices to ensure that Judaism would continue and be passed down to his two sons, Martin and Alex. During those years, Mr. Forkosh showed a courage and inner strength, a self-sacrifice that can only be a result of genuine faith, a genuine faith that burned brightly in his life throughout its entirety. Nearly miraculously, Mr. Forkosh kept kosher during this span of time and was also Shomer Shabbos as well. He went to synagogue as much as he could through those years, but it wasn't always safe because of KGB oversight. So there were long stretches when he was not able to go and had to daven at home. What concerned the Soviets most, though, in those years was less the religious observances of the older generation. Rather, their goal was to wipe out Judaism from the young children who were born and raised under communist rule. And it was here that Mr. Forkosh's Mesiras Nefesh, again, his courage, his self-sacrifice, his faith, was most incredible. He was able to arrange for his sons to secretly have a Brit Milah circumcision, which was very unusual in Soviet times. And when it came to their bar mitzvahs, he arranged for the local rabbi to sort of sneak them away more than 50 miles to organize bar mitzvahs away from the eyes of the KGB. As I heard Mr. Forkosh's son Martin recount to me his father's incredible dedication in preserving a connection to Judaism under the Soviets, I could not help but think of the connection to the holiday of Hanukkah, which begins next week. The goal of the Greeks was to spiritually oppress the Jewish people. As the Midrash states, their intention was to declare that the Jews have no stake in the Torah or in the God of Israel. The Greeks banned circumcision and Torah study because they knew that without these things, the next generation of Jews would assimilate fully into Greek culture. It was Matisyahu and his sons, a group of Kohanim, of priests, who led the struggle against the Greeks. Mr. Forkosh, of course, was a Kohen. He often had the Kohen Aliyah at our shul and was always enthusiastic about Dachanan, about offering the priestly blessing to our community on the Chagim, on the holidays. You see, Kohanim who take their role seriously have a special sensitivity to Kedusha, to holiness, and they're willing to do whatever is necessary in order to protect it. It's also fascinating to note that the place we primarily light Hanukkah candles is not in the shul, but in the home. The reason for this is because the message of Hanukkah about preserving Jewish identity in the face of spiritual oppression, that battle begins and ends in the home. It's the home and the Jewish family that is always the heart of holiness. And therefore we light our Hanukkah candles there as a way of showing that this is the place that we will never submit to assimilation. During those years under Soviet rule, Mr. Forkosh lived in a world within a world. There was the public persona, the supervisor at the hat factory who people knew and respected, but there was also the inner Jewish life of his home, where Yiddish was spoken and Yiddishkeit was loved. In fact, Mr. Forkosh was once even asked to join the Communist Party. And if he had said yes, it would certainly have made life much easier for him and for his family. But he refused, of course. And in fact, he told them that he couldn't be a good communist. He couldn't join the Communist Party in good faith as long as his wife lit Shabbat candles every Friday night. Again, it was the light of the candles, that light of holiness, that was with Mr. Forkosh and his family throughout his life. Mr. Forkosh was also a Baal Tzedakah. He was one who gave generously to both Jews and non-Jews. He was always looking for opportunities to help others. He and his family would take in Jewish orphans and make sure at least temporarily they had warm food and a place to sleep. He had good relationships with the Soviet authorities and would help other Jewish families get their sons out of army service, even though he wasn't able to do the same thing for his own sons because of his close relationships and his work on behalf of others. Again, that sense of sacrifice that he was willing to make. Throughout all of this, Mr. Forkosh and his wife achieved a tremendous Kiddush Hashem, a tremendous sanctification of God's name. Unlike anything most of us can imagine here living comfortably in America. Like the Maccabees, they fought for and preserving Judaism under the harshest of conditions. In the late 70s, when the political dynamic began to shift, Mr. Forkosh and his family gained the opportunity to come to America. They chose Cleveland because it was a place where his wife had family. They became part of the community. Their sons, Martin and Alex, got married and went on to establish families of their own. Mr. Forkosh and his wife were, as you've heard, deeply loving grandparents. They helped out a tremendous amount with their granddaughters and spent many an afternoon and weekend with them, watching over them. It was clear to me just how much love they shared on those Shabbats when Mr. Forkosh and his family would sponsor a Kiddush and the whole extended family would come to shul. His granddaughters always showed him such loving respect, and the smile on Mr. Forkosh's face never got so big as when he was around them. As he would say it, they were his three jewels. He received such nachas, such pride at Michelle's wedding, and it was a picture of the two of them together from that wedding that he kept by his side in recent weeks as his health declined. I can tell you that the smile on his face in that picture was something truly to behold. Mr. Forkosh was a dedicated member of Heights Jewish Center for many years after moving to Cleveland. He lived next door to Rabbi Shore and developed a close relationship with him. When Rabbi Shore passed away about a decade ago, he found his way to our shul. And I can tell you that we were so blessed to have him as part of our community. On Shabbat morning, Mr. Forkosh was one of the first people in shul. And nearly every Shabbat morning for the last several years, Mr. Forkosh would lead the beginning of davening, Berchot HaShachar, and Pesukei Zimra. He did it as he did everything in life, with kavana, with spiritual intention, with modesty, and an inherent goodness. I always deeply appreciated hearing his accent as he davened the prayers, knowing that here is a Holocaust survivor well into his 90s who takes such pride in being able to lead our congregation in prayer. As many of you know, Mr. Forkosh's English was not so great, and I'm sorry to admit that my Yiddish is not so good either, but we always found a way to connect and communicate with each other. My grandmother, my mother's mother, was born in Rachov, not too far from where Mr. Forkosh had spent most of his life. In a certain sense, this made us landsmen, which was something very special to me. I grew up near Boston in a community without too many Hungarians, in a community that people had never even heard of Marmarish or knew where it was or what it was. And Mr. Forkosh was probably the first person I met outside my family who had even ever heard of Rachov before. Mr. Forkosh was also very proud of the progress that our shul made in recent years. He was there in the early days when there might be only a couple dozen people on Shabbat morning, and he was so glad to see it fill up over the last several years with new members, young families, and children running around on Shabbat. Mr. Forkosh did not only bless us with his presence, he offered us a blessing as a Kohen. He sang the Marmarish Niggin during Dachanan as only a Holocaust survivor can, with joy, with authenticity, and with faith. The greatest blessing, though, that Mr. Forkosh gave to all of us was the way that he lived his life. On his 90th birthday, his family sponsored a special Kiddush in his honor. His granddaughters dedicated to him a part of the Amud, the podium from which he would daven every Shabbat morning. On it is written the following words: In honor of Mr. Yosef Forkosh on his 90th birthday, a man who dedicated his life to his family, to his synagogue, and the Jewish community. That encapsulated everything that Mr. Yosef Forkosh was. His love for his family, his love for his synagogue, his love for the Jewish community, and his willingness to do anything for all of them. Mr. Forkosh's greatest blessing was that he lived his life in a way that it should only be an inspiration for us all. As I've said, a life of faith, a life of courage, a life of heroism, a life of self-sacrifice and dedication. May his life and the light that it shined. And there's a tremendous amount of light that we're able to experience from him in his life. May it always be an inspiration for us. Yehi nishmato tzur b'tzur chayim. May Yosef Forkosh's soul forever be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. Yehi zichro baruch. And may his memory forever be a blessing. At this time, I'll recite Kamei Rachamim, the memorial prayer, and I ask that people please rise. Kamei Rachamim, shochem bamromim, amatzei menucha nechona kamfei hashechina, b'malo kedushim etorim, k'zarakia mazirim, et nishmat Yosef ben Yitzchak Mordechai HaKohen, shalach lo lamo, bavor shekol kahal mitpalel b'nezkarat nishmato, b'ganein tiyeh menuchato, lachem barachamim, yastirah b'setek kenafav v'yolamim, v'yitzorah b'tzorachim et nishmato, Adonai nachalato v'yanuach hamishkabah b'shalom v'nomar amen. O God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, grant proper rest on the wings of the divine presence and the loftiest levels of the holy and pure, which shine with the brightness of the firmament, for the soul of Mr. Yosef Forkosh, who has gone to whose world and for whose memory we pray. May his resting place be in the Garden of Eden. May the Master of mercy shelter him in the shelter of his wings for eternity. And may he bind his soul in the bonds of life. May God be his heritage, and may his rest forever be in peace. And let us say, Amen. In just a little bit, we'll be continuing with the Kavurah, the burial at Zion Cemetery, followed by Shiva at the home of Martin in Solon. Shiva will be today until 8 p.m., and then I believe from Monday through Thursday from 2 to 4 and 6 to 8, and then again from Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. At this time, I'd like to call the pallbearers to come forward and ask that we remain standing also in one final act of respect that Mr. Forkosh so dutifully deserves.
If there are any here who could help act as pallbearers, if you kindly step out at this time. I'd like you to stand.